Welcome to another episode of Inflection. I am Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo. How are you?
Hi, Brian. Doing great.
Okay, we have a big show today. We're going to go over some, I think, pretty significant news items, but we're going to be talking about the Tiananmen Square incident from 1989. I'm calling it an incident because as we're going to see, the term massacre really doesn't apply. And we'll get into all of that. And if you're skeptical, I think we've made a convincing argument otherwise. But it's all connected to what's going on today, and you'll see that in a moment. So we're going to go over some news items, and it's all about the encirclement of China. It's this obsession the U.S. has had for decades and decades. Back in 1989, this is exactly what they were doing, and it's what they're still doing today. So let's just take a look at some of these news headlines. We've been talking about the protests in Malaysia a little bit and how they were copied and pasted from Hong Kong and Thailand and Myanmar into Malaysia using the exact same symbols and slogans. They're dressing exactly the same. And why? Because they're funded by the exact same organizations, the National Endowment for Democracy, the US government, essentially. So the protesters were out in Malaysia and they wanted the government to step down. And now so it has. And who took their place? So this is from Voice of America. This is US State Department media. Malaysia's king names new prime minister from corruption-mired party. That sounds very objective. So they're saying Malaysia's king on Friday appointed Ismail Sabri Yaakob, the country's new prime minister, returning a member of the corruption-mired United Malays National Organization to the top job 3 years after Malaysians voted the party out of office. But Angela, you remember Daniel Twining from the National Endowment for Democracy subsidiary, the International Republican Institute. We remember him coming out and talking about how the US government basically got the Malaysian opposition into power.
Malaysia, for 61 years, one party governed this country since it became independent in 1957. So IRI, we had worked in Malaysia with opposition political parties since 2002. And guess whose funding we did it with? The National Endowment for Democracy. So for 15 years, working with NED resources, we worked to strengthen Malaysian opposition parties. And guess what happened 2 months ago? After 61 years, they won. I visited and I was sitting there with many of the leaders, the new leaders of this government, many of whom were just our partners we had been working with for 15 years. And one of the most senior of them, who's now one of the people running the government, said to me, gosh, IRI, you never gave up on us even when we were ready to give up on ourselves, right? And we're sitting in the Prime Minister's office. Here we are. Guess what the first step, really one of the first steps the new government took? It froze Chinese infrastructure investments. This is not a hugely pro-American country. It's probably never going to be an actual US ally. But this is going to redound to our benefit, right? And that's an example of the long game.
So Malaysians didn't vote them out. The US government threw them out. By sufficiently rigging the elections, by dumping millions of dollars into the campaigns of the opposition and getting them into power. So this is that government back in power. So do you think, Angelo, that the protests are going to stop? Because they said that was the worst government ever. Any government is better than that one. And that's why they were out protesting. Now that government stepped down. Now they have a new government. Do you think they're going to be happy, or do you think they're going to continue complaining and protesting?
No, it's the same story that it repeats itself again. This is an Asia Spring. You know, it's the replica of what happened in the Arab world. So we're seeing the same tactics in Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, in the whole region. So here it's you and I. We are not driven in ideology left or wing. We don't care, and we're not taking sides. What we're doing here is to expose the foreign meddling. That is very important, you know, because, well, again, we are for self-determination and against the foreign meddling, because you cannot have a democracy if there is meddling.
Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to point out, that those protesters, we pointed out how Bersay, the street movement, how they they got caught taking US government money, and then they were making excuses and trying to explain how they were, okay, we were taking US government money, but not for the actual protest. That's not how it works. And so why were they hiding it in the first place? Because they know they're doing something wrong. Malaysia Kini, the big newspaper, a lot of people who actually agree with our analysis read Malaysia Kini. They had no idea it was funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. It's on their website, but they don't make a big issue about it, and they trust that people won't dig under the surface and find out. And of course, Anwar Ibrahim is the proxy of choice the US wants in power. So they're not going to call off their protests until he's in power. So they might call off the protests for a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, but I guarantee you that they're not done yet. They're going to try to worm their way into power. Time is against Washington. This is all about encircling China. Anwar Ibrahim and his political party, the first thing they did when they got near the levers of power in Malaysia in 2018 was cancel all the joint Chinese infrastructure projects. And Daniel Twining was very happy to brag about that fact. And because they really didn't cement their hold on power, that didn't really stick. But we could probably guess that they're going to try to do that again. And they're very desperate to do this. We see what the US is doing all around the globe. So there's that. Let's take a look at, we'll do Cambodia, but I think this one, just to show you how desperate and how far the US will go, let's take a look at this. This is in Baluchistan, Pakistan, the southwest province of Pakistan. This is the Indus River. And so everything west of the Indus River, the US wants to destabilize. Why? Because that is where the China-Pakistan economic corridor passes through. This is roads, pipelines, power plants, and Gwadar port, which is very important for Pakistan and China. And so this is Al Jazeera, Qatari state media. At least 2 killed in suicide bombing in southwest Pakistan. Police say 2 children killed, 3 wounded in a bomb attack targeting a vehicle carrying Chinese nationals in Gwadar. And we remember 9 Chinese engineers were killed, I think, within the last month. And before that, there was a bombing at a hotel that the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan was staying at. Luckily, he wasn't there at the time. So we see this uptick in violence. Angelo, you sent me this article. Protests in Pakistan erupt again against China's Belt and Road Plan. And when you read this, first let's read this part. Demonstrations shut down Gwadar, where Chinese are blamed for lack of water and electricity and threat to local fishing. And you read all of this nonsense in The Guardian, and it's not until, where is it? Right here, almost halfway through or a little bit more than halfway through, they finally admit China is not to blame for the power and water shortages that have plagued Gwadar in recent weeks. Baluchistan is Pakistan's most undeveloped and most neglected region, and Gwadar is not connected to the national grid. So, Angelo, like the whole point of the Belt and Road Initiative is to fix that. So one point I want to make, and then I want to hear your take on this. The US is going to pretend that they and these armed militants that they're backing, and I will show the evidence again, just in case people haven't seen it yet. They will pretend that they are saving Baluchistan from China. But in reality, China is saving Baluchistan from being an undeveloped backwater that has no chance of development unless this infrastructure is built. And so it's just interesting how the US is actually stopping development, ensuring the conditions for violent insurgency continue to persist and ruin people's lives and hold not just Baluchistan back, but Pakistan and the whole region back. Angelo, what are your thoughts on this? Again, just another terrorist attack backed by the US against the Belt and Road Initiative.
Well, Baluchistan is very similar to Xinjiang. If you look at the poverty, the extremism, the terrorism, why we have to ask the question why there's terrorism and why there's meddling. Well, terrorism and radicalism happens when there's poverty. Here, the Belt and Road Initiative would actually bring prospect for the whole region. You know, they are going to have lots of opportunities. Now they're trying to come up with we want to protect the fishermen and so on. So you do want that area just to be living on fishing. I mean, this is just ridiculous. So they're using NGOs that are actually financed by the US. So I said it's similar to Xinjiang, because remember, there's already a government in exile that is ready. You know, there's a Khan of Kalat who's living in the UK, and they've been trying to put pressure on Pakistan to do exactly the same fake news as they did in Xinjiang. And so you see, it's just this dividing. Just try. The US just wants for the regions to stay poor and not to have those infrastructure, because they know this is going to accelerate the shift of gravity of the economy, the world economy, and it's inevitable. The shift is going towards Eurasia, and they need to accept that. So I don't think this will block. You know, even when it comes to Malaysia, you saw they stopped the project, but then it was just a delay. They have no choice. They have no choice. You know, even if you are backed by the US, at the end of the day, China is your main partner. And it's not only those Belt and Road Initiative actually not going to connect you only with China. They're going to connect you with other neighbors. So it's just about delaying those projects.
I want to point out how ridiculous this all is. However, locals said they have been promised that China's investment in Gwadar would mean development for the area, including the establishment of a coal-fired power station to provide much-needed electricity. Yet in the years since China was granted a lease on Gwadar port, no work has begun on any such projects, and instead locals say that China's presence is undermining their livelihoods and creating local food shortages by allowing Chinese fishing boats to illegally fish in Pakistan's waters around the port. This is all nonsense. And I mean, first of all, how can China finish these infrastructure projects if every other week their engineers are being murdered by terrorists? So that's one point to make. Number two, about fishing, you kind of touched on it. When you see the fishing operations around Gwadar port, these are not commercial trawlers. These are just local fishermen scratching a living. What they need is real economic opportunities. That's what infrastructure and development and the economic corridor would bring. And just as you mentioned, this is to delay that shift, that balance of economic power from west to east. And it's happening regardless. But the thing that I worried about, especially with the US leaving Afghanistan, was now they can really roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty with these covert terrorist operations. They have no official military presence in Afghanistan, or soon they won't, and they will have this plausible deniability, and they can say, well, you know, we left the region, it's not us. It's just a coincidence that they're attacking every country or project that we don't like and want to block or destabilize and overthrow. I want to show people, this is from 2011, Free Baluchistan. The United States should do more to support Baluch insurgents. If you come down here, Pakistan has given China a base at Gwadar in the heart of Baluch territory, so an independent Baluchistan would serve U.S. strategic interests. So right there, so that's an op-ed, and some people have said, oh, so it's just an op-ed, that doesn't mean anything. Well, they did this also. This is a House resolution in the U.S. Congress. This is expressing the sense of Congress that the people of Baluchistan, currently divided between Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan, have the right to self-determination and to their own sovereign country. So this isn't just an op-ed somewhere. This was U.S. foreign policy to back the terrorists in Baluchistan, to carve off Baluchistan, and to block the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and to be part of this wider encirclement of China. Anything else on this Baluchistan bombing, Angelo?
I want to add up something. There's a misconception about the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of people, they think that China is forcing upon countries to, oh, you have to do the Belt and Road Initiative and so on. It's not like this. Actually, countries are looking for China. They look for, because China is offering expertise in building infrastructure, and it's offering loans at very good conditions, much way better than the IMF. And there's no conditions linked to those loans. It's not about, oh, we are going to open our markets, or we are going to lend you some money as long as you restructure your electoral system and so on. So you see, the thing is that the perception is that China is trying to impose that on countries. It's not true. It's Pakistan. It's all those countries that are going to China. They're seeing projects that are being successful, and they're looking at the whole picture of win-win. It's going to be, finally we can build the foundation for prosperity. So it's not the other way around. China, if you don't want to do Belt and Road Initiative, that's fine. I mean, if you don't see a positive point for your country, that's fine. I mean, it's not China that is going to those countries saying, oh, you have to do that. No, China, you want to do it? Okay, well, it's fine. We're there. If we need us, we're there. So, but they make it look, those Western media, they make it look, oh, China is invading. It's invading Pakistan. See what they're doing to those fishermen and so on. So do you think the West cares about those fishermen? No. Well, if you are moving, if you want progress, well, those small fishermen, of course, some are going to lose, but they are going to have tens of thousands of jobs in Gwadar port. It's going to compete with hubs like Singapore. I mean, do you want Pakistan to live out of fishing? Or do you want to become like the next Singapore in the region? I mean, it's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, and it's interesting how a lot of Belt and Road Initiative projects do pass through desperately. They're so impoverished that they're desperate for opportunities, and like you said, it's a no-brainer. The northeast of Thailand is kind of always playing catch up. And for the high-speed rail to be passing through the northeast of Thailand, it's going to bring so many opportunities. The same with Laos. It's just been an impoverished country because it's landlocked, it has impossible terrain to pass through. Now they're being linked. Now they're being turned into a corridor where all of these people and goods and everything else is going to pass through. It's a huge opportunity. It is a no-brainer, and the U.S. is trying to stop it. One more before we get into our main topic. We haven't actually touched on Cambodia much at all. And the reason why is because not that much is going on in Cambodia, because they have just completely gutted U.S. interference in their country. They've thrown out a lot of people. They've arrested a lot of people. They've permanently banned the opposition from ever being in politics. And some people will say, that sounds horrible. That sounds like a horrible dictatorship. When you see how cartoonishly enslaved to the United States the opposition in Cambodia was, it is very obvious why they've been excluded from the political process. So they've still got a little mopping up to do, and that's what this Al Jazeera article is about. Again, this is Qatari state media. Qatar does not have independent foreign policy to speak of. Wherever the U.S. goes, they go. Cambodia union leader faces court verdict as crackdown continues. So that's what I was just talking about, this clearing out of U.S. interference in Cambodia's internal political affairs. Rong Chun is accused of incitement and faces up to 2 years in prison if convicted. And if you go through this article, it's the same thing you're going to see from the BBC or Reuters or any Western corporate or state media organization. They're going to cite these organizations like Lakato. They don't tell you who is Lakato, so I will tell you who is Lakato. This is their website. These are their gold donors. USAID right there. UK Embassy right there. Australian Embassy. Actually, the whole team, all of the Western countries that are sidekicks in American imperialism, they're all represented there. And you got others like Save the Children, which is kind of like an intermediary that the US State Department, the British Foreign Office, and Open Society pass money through. So that's what this Lakato is. And who is Rong Chun himself? Let's see, what is the full name of his organization? One is the Cambodian Independent Teachers Association. And another one is the Cambodian Confederation of Unions. And so there's two kinds of unions in Cambodia in pretty much every country. Real unions, and then unions the National Endowment for Democracy sets up. So this is from one of these German versions of the NED, building unions in Cambodia. And Angelo, are you familiar with the Solidarity Center?
Not with this one, no. I mean, there are so many entities.
So Solidarity Center is the NED arm that focuses primarily on building fake unions. And I say fake union because these are the interests creating these fake unions that a real union is supposed to be organized against. So it says right here, USAID support. Solidarity Center began its operations in Cambodia, and they just started creating all of these fake unions to use against the people in Cambodia and the government of Cambodia. So that's who this Rong Chun guy is. He's part of one of these US-backed fake unions, and he had a fake teachers organization. Angelo?
How ironic. The US, if you look at history in the US, the trade unions, labor unions, they've been suppressing. It's been like 50 years. They've been suppressing completely the trade unions. The level of people that are in a union, it's around 10% in the US, and they want to export. They want to impose unions on other countries. So how ironic! It's just ironic.
Yes. So there's that aspect. What else has Rong Chun done that might have landed him in jail or got him on the wrong side of things in Cambodia? This is 2013. This is from Radio Free Asia. This is a US State Department media platform. Striking garment workers join Cambodian opposition protests. So that's what they use these unions for, not to advocate for the workers, but just to use them for things like regime change. So there he is. That's Rong Chun. He's up on the platform there, or on top of a vehicle, doing a speech. And he's joining up with the Cambodia National Rescue Party. Angela, do you know where the Cambodia National Rescue Party is now based?
Washington.
I'll give you Washington. I was going to say, I'll give you a hint. It's not nowhere in Asia. Definitely not in Cambodia. So yeah. So this is what he was doing. So he's part of the a U.S. affiliated fake union, and he's working with the U.S.-backed opposition. Now, how do we know this opposition is U.S.-backed? I think it's important to go through this because when we get into the Tiananmen Square incident, it's very important to point out how the U.S. sets these things up and just how deep they go into these countries. So that opposition party was headed by this guy named Kem Sokha. That is him. And this is a video from the Phnom Penh Post. This is one of these newspapers that was run by an American. It's very odd to have an American running a Cambodian newspaper. Sokha video producer closes Phnom Penh office in fear. Why was he in fear? What was this video about? The offending video clip of Sokha is 13 minutes long, an edited version. It's two segments of the longer one spliced together. And it says, Sokha says he has visited the US at the government's request every year since 1993 to learn about the democratization process, and that they decided he should step aside from politics to create change in Cambodia. And then here they're talking about that they can't just remove the leader of Cambodia. They have to do a complete system overhaul because that's how imperialism works. You have to impose the administrative system on the targeted country. So that's what they're talking about right here. And then he says, and the USA that has assisted me, they asked me to take the model from Yugoslavia, Serbia, where they can change the dictator, Slobodan Milosevic. And then they say, Milosevic had a huge number of tanks, but they changed things by using this strategy, and they take this experience for me to implement in Cambodia. But no one knows about this. Well, now Now they know because he made a video about it. It gets worse. He admits, at least he has enough sense to admit this, I do not do anything at my own will. They're experts, professors at universities in Washington, D.C., Montreal, Canada, hired by the Americans in order to advise me on strategy to change the dictator leader in Cambodia. And the rest of this article here, what this is saying is that no one is disagreeing or trying to deny that Kem Sokha, the head of the opposition in Cambodia, said these things. They fully admit he said these things, but they're saying this wasn't treason. This was just part of the democratic process. There's nothing wrong with getting advice from a foreign government. That's what they were trying to say. It's the textbook definition of treason. Angelo, I'm going to go into one more thing about this. But
it makes me think a lot about Aung San Suu Kyi. She's surrounded by all foreign advisors, and she's actually taking orders from them. It's just ridiculous. And again, we see, I think it's his daughter actually that is actually on TV, and she's asking for pressure and sanctions. I mean, this is the high level of treason. I mean, it's unbelievable. If you were to turn this around and having U.S. politicians, that's his daughter right there.
That's his daughter in Washington, D.C.
So it's
and that's
funny
Human Rights Watch, Phil Robertson.
But it's funny to see how they keep on accusing foreign countries on what they are actually doing themselves in other countries. You know, this meddling. There's no Russia meddling in the U.S., but there is U.S. meddling in Russia and other countries. It's just hypocrisy.
So I thought it was important to show people these headlines. This is what's happening right now. This is what the U.S. is doing because, again, Cambodia now is a very, very close partner with China because they decided to be so direct in uprooting U.S. interference, calling it out and uprooting it, throwing not just low-level protest leaders into jail, but the head of the opposition party, throwing him in jail for treason. And then they let him out, but he's banned permanently from politics. He cannot go into politics or he goes back to jail. The US and the European Union came down very hard on Cambodia, and Cambodia basically said, we don't care, we'll just do more business with China. And so this is what's going on in Cambodia. We just talked about Malaysia, how the protests are most likely going to continue until they get Anwar Ibrahim, the US puppet of choice there. There's the conflict in Myanmar, the protests. Angelo, you and I, we do live coverage of the violent mobs here in Bangkok that look exactly like the mobs in Hong Kong. And so this is what's going on now. So when we get into the main topic here, let's take a look. Tiananmen Square, 1989. This is from The Telegraph. WikiLeaks, no bloodshed inside Tiananmen Square, cables claim. What cables? Cables from the US State Department. And actually, we're gonna go over a lot of documentation where it's the US government itself, the same government that lies about this every single year, admitting that there was no bloodshed and that, well, there's no bloodshed in the square, and that the actual bloodshed that did take place was a two-way street. The protesters were murdering soldiers. They were torching their vehicles. There are picture after picture of the protesters torching military vehicles. That the army came there to slaughter people. Why did they let entire columns of their armored vehicles get torched by the protesters? There were soldiers. These are images that are too grisly to show, but soldiers murdered, lynched, burned to death. Angelo, about 1989, Tiananmen Square, I mean, what did you used to believe about that? And how do you see it now? And what changed your mind about it?
Well, like everyone, there was so much fake news. They were talking about 10,000 protesters being killed. It was like there's a bad guy in front of them, and you just realize if you dig a little bit, and actually thanks to WikiLeaks. Well, think about it. You know, if because there are those leaks, then the Daily Telegraph has no choice but to report this, and it's exposing actually all these Western media that don't do their job. You know, they do just one article, they just throw you a bone for to give you to give you a feeling that they're doing their job. But then after that, you are going to have the next time they are going to report about Tiananmen Square, it's going to be again lies. So here what happens is that what did we learn from those WikiLeaks cables is that there was no one died on the Tiananmen Square, that actually the military were unarmed, while the protesters, they were throwing like petrol bombs. So we had many militaries that actually died, that burned alive. I mean, it's just terrorists. They even hanged. There are some pictures you cannot show here because it's going to be a problem with YouTube. But they would burn them alive and actually hang them on the bridge. And here what you had was what happens that it was at the beginning was a student protest. It was hijacked by thugs. I mean, thugs. In every single country and cities, you have thugs that take over and they become extremely violent. And then we are going to touch this. There's the meddling. Because this is what happened. Very often it's about hijacking movements. China had its own problems, corruptions and so on. I mean, China was going through a huge transition from a civil war to the Great Leap Forward to the Cultural Revolution, and they wanted reforms. It was a sensitive moment. 1979, Deng Xiaoping decided to do the opening up policy. Opening up policy. They also wanted to do some reforms, internal reforms. The Communist Party in China has been reforming forever. Even now, it's a system that even though there's always one party, but there's constant reforms. It's about self-reflection. It self-reflect. It goes what the population wants. It's sensing, what do they want, and that's what makes it very legitimate, because it's very close to the people. So now you got this story about Tiananmen Square. It's completely the opposite. You had the police that was unarmed. They didn't have helmets, and they were killed. It was just and the amount again. We're talking about the estimate is closer to 300 people died. 300 people died. If you compare, it's the same amount of people that died in South Africa a month ago during the riots. I mean, for a country of 1.4 billion people, it's something. Well, it's a sad thing, but it happened, and we need to look at where China is right now. They took the right decisions, and people are just happy with the outcome. In 1989, look at what happened since 1989 till now, and where China is. It's just a bump on the road for what happened in China for China.
Yes. So what I kind of want to do first is do a little bit of what was going on before 1989, long before 1989. And I've showed this before. We've talked about this before, Angelo. The Office of the Historian, this is a .gov website. This is part of the US State Department. This is from 1964, Review of Tibetan Operations. This is what the US was doing inside of China in the 1960s, actually before that. And so they're talking about the CIA Tibetan activity consists of political action, propaganda, and paramilitary activity. Paramilitary means they are armed. They are killing people in armed combat. The purpose of the program at this stage is to keep the political concept of autonomous Tibet alive within Tibet and among foreign nations, principally India, and to help build a capability for resistance against possible political developments inside communist China. And they were doing this then, and they were doing it all the way up until 1989, and they've been doing it all the way up. And we just went over 3 examples of how the US is doing this all along China's periphery. There's one more. Again, people should be getting familiar with these documents by now. This is dated 1965, and they're talking about how the February decision to bomb North Vietnam and the July approval of Phase 1 deployments make sense only if they're in support of a long-run United States policy to contain communist China. This is in the 1960s. And they talk about the 3 fronts to contain China along. So when you have all of that in mind, and then we look at what happened in 1989, we can make some assumptions, and we could also go through the evidence here of how the U.S. was backing these protesters, just like we catch them doing all the time now, and we expose them doing all the time now. They were doing that in the lead up to the 1989 incident in Tiananmen Square. Now I want to read what the WikiLeaks cables actually said. So, embassy officers encountered a number of incidents in different locations in which crowds harassed military or police personnel, forced their vehicles to turn around, jeered at displays of captured military equipment, or vandalized captured military vehicles. And again, the pictures of the armored personnel carriers and the tanks being torched, sometimes with people inside. There's also a New York Times article witnessing China's 1989 protests 1,000 miles from Tiananmen Square. And they're talking about U.S. Representative Andy Levin of Michigan. And this is an excerpt. Word spread quickly about what happened. Rumor had it that protesters were being held in a particular police station, and a huge crowd massed outside it. The students weren't there after all, but the crowd set fire to the police station. 3 fire trucks arrived, sirens blaring. The first instinct of the crowd was to move aside, but then I could see the crowd change its mind, as in, wait a minute, we set this fire on purpose, so we don't want this fire truck putting it out. The crowd converged on a truck, chased off the firemen, flipped the truck on its side, and set the truck itself on fire. I'm going to go over a couple more of these, but what does this tell us? This tells us that the protesters weren't peacefully sitting in Tiananmen Square, and then the military and the police just came and cracked down on them. They were destroying the surrounding area. They were fighting with police and military. The police and military were, in many cases, withdrawing because they didn't want to confront the protesters violently. Now, Angelo, you showed me a clip of who at the time was a very young, protest leader who has since, moved to the United States and become an integral part of the propaganda war against China. Can you tell us a little bit about what she was doing then, what she said, and how it kind of links to what we see in protest movements today, like more recently, like in Hong Kong, Ukraine, the Arab Spring, and now what we see in Thailand, Myanmar, and Malaysia?
Well, it's within the whole playbook of color revolution. So what you need to do is you need to create martyrs. You need to actually find whoever is willing to collaborate with you. Or here in this case, it's about betraying your motherland. So they identify young. Usually they are young kids. The same as Joshua Wong. Back then in 1989, they identified one of them was Chai Ling. Chai Ling is a young girl. She's like 18 years old. And she actually contacts the CNN, and she's having this interview. And she says during the interview, she says, we need to have a bloodshed.
I have been feeling very sad recently. The students themselves lack a developed sense of democracy. To be honest, from the day I called for a hunger strike, I knew we would not get any results. Certain people, certain causes are bound to fail. I have been very clear about this all along, but I've made an effort to present a staunch image, to show that we were striving for victory. But deep down, I knew it was all futile. The more involved I got, the sadder I became. I already felt this back in April. All along, I've kept it to myself, because being Chinese, I felt I shouldn't badmouth the Chinese. But I can't help thinking sometimes, and I might as well say it. You, the Chinese, you are not worth my struggle. You are not worth my sacrifice. But then, I can also see that in this movement, there are many people who do have a conscience. There are many decent people among the students, workers, citizens, and intellectuals. The students keep asking, what should we do next? What can we accomplish? I feel so sad. Because how can I tell them that what we are actually hoping for is bloodshed? For the moment when the government has no choice but to brazenly butcher the people. Only when the square is awash with blood will the people of China open their eyes. Only then will they really be united. But how can I explain any of this to my fellow students? And what is truly sad is that some students and some famous, well-connected people are working hard to help the government, to prevent it from taking such measures. For the sake of their selfish interests and their private dealings, they are trying to cause our movement to collapse and get us out of the square before the government becomes so desperate that it takes action. If we allow the movement to collapse on its own, then the government will be able to wipe out all the leaders of the movement, as well as those leaders in the party and in the military who dare to oppose them, who represent the people. Deng Xiaoping has made it very clear that there is a small handful of people, not only in the party and in society, but also among the students. That's why I feel so sad, because I can't say all this to my fellow students. I can't tell them straight out that we must use our blood and our lives to call on the people to rise up. Of course, the students will be willing, but they are still such young children. Are you going to stay in the square yourself? No, I won't.
We need people to die in the hands of the PLA. That's what she's aiming for. And when she's asked about, are you willing to stay on the square if there is any bloodshed? And she says, no, it's not for me. So later on, she was actually rescued by Yellow Bird Operation, which was a CIA rescue plan. I mean, basically was about how we can take all those leaders, student leaders into the US, and then they would become the front working against China in the US. So she was rescued by Yellow Bird project.
Just a moment, because and I want you to continue, but I just want to show people that you're not just making this up. This isn't a conspiracy theory.
No.
This is in the Financial Times, Tiananmen Square, the long shadow. And if you come down here, it's a long article. There's a lot of very revealing things in it. But it says the extraction missions, which you were just talking about, aided by MI6, the UK's secret intelligence service, and the CIA, according to many accounts, had scrambler devices, infrared signalers, night vision goggles, and weapons. And I can guarantee you that the CIA and MI6 didn't just wake up one day and get involved in withdrawing these assets. That's what they were from China. They had been behind them all along since before Tiananmen Square. They were building them up. They were leading up to this moment. So please continue, Angelo.
Yeah, well, there's another point. So it's, we'll put the video link because I think it's extremely important, and it's exactly the same. So basically, she's the replica of Joshua Wong when it comes to Hong Kong. So they're playing on the ego. 18 years old. I mean, what does she know about life? What does she know about life? I mean, really, she's heading a movement. She might be inspiring, but and the slogans are. If you hear about those slogans, there are slogans coming from the West: freedom, democracy, and so on. And what happened back then? You need to look back at 1989. You had the proportion of students. For China, students, they look up to students, because especially back then at that time, you had a very low level of education, average, just because of, historically there was a Cultural Revolution, and those were the first generations to get a university education. So people would look up to them. So then you have those students, 18 years old, calling up for freedom and so on. And then there are some points that actually tells us that this was planned. Just a single point. James Lilley is a CIA agent that was actually appointed U.S. ambassadors to Beijing 4 weeks before Tiananmen Square incident. And then it coincided with the visit of Gorbachev. So we need to challenge. You and I, we're not into conspiracy theories. We're trying to put out there all the elements, and at the end, people they can make their own, their own judgment. But those models they've been replicated. So in other countries, in other color revolution. So Gene Sharp, the one that is behind the playbook of color revolution, he was there. He was on Tiananmen Square.
He was there. Yes.
He was there. He's the one that
before
actually
too. He wasn't there as it was happening. He's like, I need to get over there and take a look at this. He was there before it happened.
And then you had Voice of America that was broadcasting 24 hours a day. I mean, what do Voice America do? It's the propaganda arm. And they were, and so when you are there 24 hours a day, and you have lots of people listening to you, it's power. Communication is power. So what happened then after, there's a martial law, but they were expelled. I mean, China learned from that, and they knew that there was infiltration. But again, China was a fine line, when you're opening up. The funding for your economy is coming from the US. So you throwing them a bone. Okay, we are going to accept Voice of America in China and so on. So it was a fine line how we can open up and actually have some meddling. But they knew about the meddling. So and somehow they got through that. There was after 1989 there was international sanctions against China. But look at where China is now. It managed to keep preserving its national its national unity and protect its sovereignty. Because again, it comes down always to sovereignty. We don't care about whoever is in power, but ultimately Chinese need to decide for their own system, and whoever is going to govern China. No, it's not a person that is living in the US, and we don't have to like their system. Chinese have to like their system.
Exactly. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm going to get into some more of the evidence regarding the incident itself. But what you're just saying is so important. What was the US trying to do? So we showed these documents from the 1960s where they're just openly saying they want to contain China. They're going to back armed militants to fight and destabilize China. The whole purpose of all of that is to subordinate China to the US-led international rules-based order. This is what they have been trying to do for decades to China. And a lot of people say, well, the US helped build up China. They sent all their factories there. Why did they do that? They did that because it was part of what you were just saying about opening up China. And then they thought, in 1989, they thought this is the moment. We helped build them up. We got them to open up. And now we're going to flip the government. We're going to do to China what they did to the Soviet Union, what they would eventually do to countries like Serbia, and what we've seen them do all during the Arab Spring in 2011, and what they're trying to do in Southeast Asia right now. So that's what they were trying to do, and they failed. And just like you said, China learned a lot of important lessons. People say, why does China have the Great Wall, the Great Internet Wall? It's a great firewall. Why do they have that? They have that because they understand what the U.S., what their intentions are. They're not trying to have a normal relationship with China. They're trying to subordinate the country to U.S. hegemony. And it threatens China's very existence, especially, as you like to point out, there's a lot of people there. When you destabilize a country that big, everything is amplified. All the tragedies are amplified. I want to show people this. This is from 1989, the Washington Post. Images vilify protesters. Sometimes images vilify protesters because the protesters were acting villainous. Let's look down here. The government's case is bolstered. They're talking about the Chinese government's case, about how it wasn't a one-sided massacre like the Western media has been lying about ever since it happened. Is bolstered by the fact that in some areas, demonstrators did attack troops who did not respond, and these incidents were captured on videotape. On nightly television now, images are broadcast of protesters stoning troops, beating them with poles, and in some particularly dramatic photos, firebombing trucks. Angelo, you were just talking about that. Buses, and even armored personnel carriers. In some cases, soldiers were still inside at the time. On one avenue in western Beijing, demonstrators torched an entire military convoy of more than 100 trucks and armored vehicles. Aerial pictures of the conflagration and columns of smoke have powerfully bolstered the government's argument that the troops were victims, not executioners. Other scenes show soldiers' corpses and demonstrators stripping automatic rifles off of unresisting soldiers. So see, when we look at this, what are they saying? They're trying to say, well, yeah, that all happened, but we're still going to keep telling our lie about how that was a one-sided massacre. It obviously wasn't. Angela, have you ever seen this Washington Post article where they're
Yes, I did say it. I'd like to touch the psychology behind those color revolution, and especially when it touches kids. You know, imagine yourself, you are 18 years old. I mean, and you are in Tiananmen Square, and they're calling, what do you know about life? What do you know about history? You know, do you realize the funding, who's behind this? I mean, do people do research? No. There's a movement, and they're saying, oh, you know, it's against corruption, it's against the system. You know, we all rebel against the system when you're young, you know, and kids are led by emotions. You know, we say, oh, it's about, let's change the world. We all want to change the world. So they are a very easy target. It's so easy. That's the same as they did in Hong Kong. They only say to kids, you are going to lose your freedom. I mean, imagine at the emotional level what it does. And the problem is that it's only now when you study, when you realize what is the geopolitics behind this, and you've been a long time in Asia, so you have first-hand experience. I've been 25 years in China, the same. You know, it's the Angelo of that is 50 years old is not the Angelo that is 18 years old. If I was 18 years old, I would be in Tiananmen Square, and I would be behind this, and I would be like, oh, because it's something big. We are going to change the world. And that's how they attract the kids. And I don't want to do ageism, you know, like the older guy that is looking down on all younger kids. It is just sad, you know. It's just how they manipulate people on the emotional level and not on the rational level. So be very careful, you know. Whoever is led by those emotional triggers, be careful, because at the end of the day, it's about look for facts. You know, and the good thing in China is that because of Confucianism, you know, it's more rational. They look into rational. You know, they are saying that, you know, you need to look for fact. You know, if you want to understand the reality, look for fact. So just that. It's just feeling sad that they just aiming at kids and aiming at martyrs. You know, Chai-Ling, in that video, she said we were looking for martyrs. There's a common point in every single color revolution. They need to have people dying. So remember, in Maidan revolution in Ukraine, you had the Georgian snipers killing both sides, and then claiming, oh, it's the military. You know, it's the military, the barbarians. I mean, what does it do? If you look from the PLA, for example, in 1989. What does it do to kill your own people? Do you think a PLA is someone that is different from the people? They are, you know, they are protecting. First of all, they protected. You know, it's about protecting life. But you know, do you think a military is happy to kill its own people? No, they're there to protecting the protesters. You know, that it doesn't turn into like bloodshed. And then you have protesters. They want bloodshed. You see. So it's just
she admitted that that she wanted bloodshed because it was the only way to turn people against the government, and that it would have to be provoked. And then she was complaining about other protesters who were trying to diffuse the situation and avoid violence continue. I just wanted to point that out because she really very specifically made that point.
No, again, it's just the violence came. They had to protect themselves at the end. The military, the PLA, but the violence started from the protesters. And if you look at how many people died, around 300 people. It's probably half of them were militaries. They were unarmed. What I mean? And at most they had sticks, and they were unprepared. It's not like now you have police that are trained for this type of protest. Back then they took the PLA was very basic army with no experience, and of course, what are you expecting? You've been thrown like petrol bombs. So there were some reactions. So it's just now the narratives has been hijacked, and thanks to WikiLeaks again. You see what WikiLeaks is doing now? They're exposing those evidence. But the question is, how come 99% of people in the West don't know about this? And this is why we make it our responsibility just to come out and say, well, those are the facts. We're not asking people to change their opinions, but just put the facts. Those are the facts. You believe for 20 years, you believe that 10,000 people died on Tiananmen Square. Now you know that no one died on Tiananmen Square, and that 300 people died in reality, and half of them were military. Now people can make their own opinion. Make your own opinion. You've been lied to. How many times have you been lied to? You've been lied to when it came to the weapons of mass destruction. You've been lied to Assad gassing its own people. How many times are you going to learn that you are in a system that is lying to you? So you're a victim of your own system. So I think the West should reform their own system before trying to reform other countries' system. I mean, it's full of lie. We living in a constant lie. So I think it's only and that's the main reason we're coming out and trying to expose those lies.
And another real important point to make is that they wanted violence, and they were very confident that the Western media, no matter what happened, what actually really happened, the Western media could twist it out of context, twist it out of reality, and present it any way they wanted in front of the global public. And that's exactly what they've done ever since 1989. Even to this day, people still think, some people who admire what China has become, they'll still make the concession, back then maybe they did that, but that was then, and this is now, things have changed. Even they don't want to dig into it because it is such a monumental lie, and it's just so much effort to break through the propaganda, the brainwashing that has gone on. And again, we're not presenting people China's side of the story. I'm showing people the West's own words, the U.S. State Department in their cables, old Washington Post articles admitting that the mob was killing soldiers. They were killing soldiers. The soldiers didn't want the fight. It was provoked violence. And we heard one of the protest leaders admit they wanted violence. And we see this so many times ever since then, just as you said. One more. This was an article that you sent me. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about what was in here. But the thing that distracted me from actually reading this was I saw this statue and I recognized it instantly. I mean, I was like 7 years old when this happened. So I don't remember anything when it actually happened. But when I saw this is familiar to me because this is the Democracy Award from the National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, the NED and the CIA have their fingerprints all over the Tiananmen Square incident. And the Financial Times admits that the CIA was involved in smuggling human assets out of the country to Hong Kong. And so I just want people to realize just how big this lie is, how they've reinforced it by doing things like this. So this award that they give out to puppets of U.S. Foreign interference all around the globe, this is all based on this scene from Tiananmen Square in 1989. This is how they reinforce the lie. What was there anything about this article Angelo?
Well, they're giving lots of very interesting links. Actually, Chow Collective is a very great platform of based out of Chinese diaspora Chinese living in the US. So they have some very interesting articles there. I just want to point out something, but because I live in China and I see protests, in China, there are hundreds of thousands of protests every year. So when they think that people are not allowed to protest in China, it's completely wrong. Actually, protest is a right that is written in the Chinese constitution. So, but there's a main difference between protests in China and in the West. Well, in China, if you protest, the government is going to listen to you because they want stability. One very important point is that when you have a country of 1.4 billion people, over 50 nationalities, it's extremely complex. You need to look at China as being more like a continent than a country. It's much more complex than any other countries. So the government listens to you and they are going to take some countermeasure. They are going to find solutions. And there's really a dialogue between the government and the people. There's constantly surveys, government makes surveys and it anticipates the problems of the society. Well, look at the US. You have a movement like BLM. People going to the streets for 6 months, destroying everything. Now I'm asking, what did it change since BLM movement? You know what they did? They changed names of streets and they put down some statues. But did it change anything for Black people? That's what I'm asking. Did it change? No. It played. What people don't understand is that it played in the division. The more people are divided between Democrats and Republicans, the more they have the illusion of democracy. You stand for one side against the other, and in reality the two sides are the same. And I want to just relate it to Black Lives Matter. What they don't understand is that 20-30 years earlier, there was the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo of that time. They actually partnered with the Black Panthers, and they realized that actually they were played against each other. So they were working together because they realized that in reality, there were Black people, poor Black people, and poor white people. You see how people are played in the West. You have the freedom of speech, but it's an illusion. You are going to protest. You are going to do, to destroy your own streets, districts, and so on. But the government's not going to listen to you. In China, believe me, after 1989, the government made lots of reforms, and it's constantly changing. It's very counterintuitive. In the West, in the US, the government is changing every 4 or 5 years. Okay, you have the illusion of choice, but in reality, nothing changes. Even the constitution hasn't changed for a long time. In China, the government is very counterintuitive. The government doesn't change, but in reality, policies change all the time because the government is listening to people. And this is why you have an extremely high level of satisfaction. So you see, look at history. Well, it's sad what happened in 1989 in Tiananmen Square, but China learned from that. Everything is linked, and it's important to look at history. China suffered from colonization. It was attacked by 8 countries. It was a huge humiliation. Then there was a World War II. There was a civil war. And it's actually civil war is not finished. They need to get Taiwan back. It's still not finished. Then you have the Great Leap Forward. Then you have the Cultural Revolution. You have opening up of China. You have Tiananmen Square. But you see, since 1989 till now, that's all positive. That's all positive. And maybe 1989 was a good thing for China. They learned from that. First thing they did was to expel all those foreign agents. Voice of America, they all expelled them, because in reality, they call them media, but they're not media. They're CIA agents. They're just CIA agents, nothing else. Nothing else. So they learn from that. And in Chinese, they say, well, to turn a setback into an opportunity. And every time when you look at the relationship of the West and China, Many times they are set back, but every time it comes back as an opportunity. Look at what happened in Hong Kong. You know, big riots, you know, lots of meddling, national security law. Now Hong Kong is at peace, and you have national, you know, national sovereignty over Hong Kong is protected. You know, they're being attacked on the microchips, you know, microchips production, semiconductors. Well, you know, China, this is an opportunity. They are going to invest into semiconductor, and it's going to become better. You know, they didn't want China to work on the space project, EU and US funded space project. But you know, China built its own, and they are going to learn from you, and they're going to be better. So the thing is that we should work together. There are so many missed opportunities. Decoupling is not the way to go. It's in China. I mean, sadly, China is showing the example. Belt and Road Initiative. If only people knew what is behind Belt and Road Initiative, you know, put the money into infrastructure, not into making the military-industrial complex richer. You know, take the example. I just, you know, this morning I was making some calculation. Afghanistan war is $2 trillion spent. $2 trillion
at least. At least.
Well, if you calculate, that would amount to giving to each Afghani $50,000. Each Afghani. Do you know how much an Afghani earns per month? An average, the minimum wage is $74. You see, there's so much waste. So China, what it has done, why China is so prosperous now? Because in the last 20 years, everything has gone into infrastructure. When you build infrastructure, you bring stability. You put the foundation for growth, for prosperity. And when you have that, you know, people are happy because this is what people are looking for. When you are trying to sell people freedom and democracy and fake human rights, can you eat your freedom? Go tell all those homeless in the US, I give you freedom. You are free to stay in the streets. Do you think he cares about his democratic rights? He doesn't have anything to eat. Give him back dignity, because it's about giving people dignity. You know, when you make people starve, when you deny Africans to have electricity, you're not giving them dignity.
A lot of good points. Actually, your point about China having to listen to the people in order to maintain stability, it's such a good point. I think such an understated point. China is a one-party government, has a one-party government. They cannot kick the can down the road by having an election and playing games, you know, between left and right. That's what the US does. That they do that. It's obvious they're all working together, but they play on this fake opposition they have with one another. And this is what keeps Americans on the hook. Every 4 years, they're waiting for the next election. Nothing is changing. No matter who they vote in, nothing changes, because democracy is a system of control. It is not a system of empowering the people. It's a system of controlling the people. When a government has to face the people and they have no scheme or scam or theater to hide behind, they have to have results. This is a good way to explain why the Chinese government has such a result-driven agenda, basically, when you look at it. Now, regarding Tiananmen Square, I mean, it really is a chapter in this story of US encirclement and containment of China. It goes back to those papers we were looking at from the 1960s, the Tibetan CIA program, that is the 1950s, actually. And it continued to 1989. And I think you made a really good point also about how in 1989, that was not about people desiring, these were people who were manipulated. They were put out into the streets. They were used by the US. This was the moment the US thought they could turn their luck with China and finally assert themselves over China, and it failed. And you're right about how China has learned the lesson, uprooted all of these foreign organizations. We watched a little mini version of that happen in Hong Kong with the national security law. And we're watching the US continue this encirclement strategy along China's peripheries and in all of the countries partnered with China. And you said about preventing Africa from getting electricity and developing. That is exactly what the US is doing. We just talked about Baluchistan in Pakistan, and how the US is deliberately backing armed rebels to stop development, to stop China from bringing in infrastructure that no one else literally in the world will be able to bring into that region. I just think it's so many pieces of the puzzle come together when you cut through the myths of Tiananmen Square and you look at the facts of what it actually was. By the US State Department's own admission, this is a huge, a big picture comes into view. Is there anything else you wanted to add in there, Angelo?
I'd love to add something. 200 years before, 1789 in France, there was a French Revolution. And I'm going to draw the parallel on how revolution are hijacked, and in reality, the history is manipulated. So I studied the French Revolution. In reality, people had one master, and it was the king. And they were actually asking for bread. The price of bread was going up, and they were pushed into the street. And they were pushed by who? By the bourgeoisie, by the rich. And they wanted bloodshed, and they want to overthrow the king because the rich wanted, the elites wanted to get the power. They had the power of money, but they wanted the real power. So in reality, the poor people, the majority of people never got the voting rights. Unlike what the Hollywood movie tells you, they never got the right. In reality, they exchanged one master against 100 masters. And for a long time, they never got the right. And even now, when you look at France, the Constitution was written by the elites. The rule of the games are written by the elites. That is the key element. And sadly, what happens is that most people don't have the maturity, the understanding of what it means to have a democracy. People don't realize that in reality, there are two concepts, electing and voting. The real democratic act is voting. Under the average system, Western style democracy, when you are electing someone, you are electing a master that is going to decide for you for a period of 4 to 5 years. So for 4 or 5 years, you don't vote for the laws, because voting is voting. It's the direct democracy that is democratic. So you see, you elect your masters. So in reality, it hasn't changed. In many systems in the West, they claim we have democracy. It hasn't changed. In some ways, the king was listening much more to the people than the people that we elect now. I'm pretty much sure that the king in France 200 years ago was listening much more to the people than the Congress now is listening to the people. How can you explain that 80% in the US wants universal healthcare, but when it comes to voting in the Congress, in the Senate, they don't listen? How can you explain that? Because they are working for the elites, they're not working for you. So the thing is that I do wish so much that people would learn about their own system first, and don't try to export a system that it doesn't work. Again, the enemy is not Americans. Americans are the first victims of their own system.
Absolutely.
So when Chinese, they're being pushed like, oh, you should have a Western side democracy. It's like, what? Would I exchange a Biden or Trump against Xi Jinping that has delivered? It started at the level of town level, village level leader, and it's meritocracy. You deliver, you go up all the level to the Politburo. That's how it works, and it's about delivering. If you don't deliver, I tell you, if you're a leader in China and you lie, I can promise overnight there would be hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. But look at how Biden, I mean, 50% of the phrases that Biden's, whatever he says is lies. You know, he said, you know, months ago he said, well, you know, we're not going to have a Saigon scenario in Afghanistan, and look at what happened. And he's going to find more lies. It's all about lying.
I think it is so important to cut through the myths of Western-style democracy. If you can cut through that, then you can look at the Tiananmen Square incident in 1989 with clear eyes and not be clouded with the notion that somehow it was driven by a desire for Western-style democracy. Because as you point out, and it just goes way back into the West's own history, as far back as you care to study, it has always been a system of control. It has always been rearranging the deck chairs, basically, for something that was going to continue happening regardless. One last thing I kind of want to throw in here was about how young people were duped back in 1989. A lot of people say, I don't know how you feel about Jackie Chan, the martial art expert and movie star, very famous all around the world. People say, well, he was so great because back then he was supporting the Tiananmen Square protesters, and now he supports the Communist Party of China. He's hated in Hong Kong, and I first of all, I don't think that's true. I think that's just the Western media smearing him because he grew up. He was one of these young idealistic people. Me, 18 years old, if I were to have a discussion with myself at 17 or 18 years old, I was a U.S. Marine serving the U.S. empire, basically. And for a short time there, I did really believe I was doing the right thing. I would be arguing with myself right now. I grew up. I learned about what really was going on. I learned about what my government was actually really doing. And I think a lot of people that got duped into the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident, going along with those protests and seeing what happened, I think a lot of them were disillusioned and they simply woke up. And I think the Western media, in addition to lying every single year on the anniversary of the violence, the two-way violence that took place there, to go and smear people who have woken up and changed their minds about things, I think that's just lie upon lie. What do you think about that, Angelo?
No, I agree 100%. I think you made some very good points here. It's just the frustration is that history repeats itself. Again, madness is keeping doing the same thing and expecting different results. I mean, again, in the West, I like to use Eric Lee quotes. When he says it's a beauty contest of electing and regretting. Elect, regret. What do you think is going to happen after Biden? Do you think it's going to something is going to change? No, it's going to be, and it's, when he was Bush, you said it's not going to be worse. Then you have Trump, it's like you're not going to have worse. Then you have Biden, it's like you're not going to have worse. You're going to have Kamala. You might actually regret Biden.
You might miss him. Yeah, you might miss Biden. You might think, oh, remember when Biden only told 50% of what he said was a lie. Remember those good old days?
Well, she'll be giggling all the time, I mean, you know how she giggles. I was just at least Biden doesn't appear much, but it's just a tragedy. It is a tragedy, and it is dangerous because this is the largest superpower. And the thing is that sometimes when your system is not working, you create trouble abroad as a diversion because your own system is not working. So it's either it deploys itself, or you go abroad and you do a diversion, because the only way now to unite people in the US is that if they go to war against a fabricated enemy. Imagine overnight if they were to go to war with China. Well, then overnight the Americans would be united. You see how you can do a diversion, and that is the risk. That is the risk.
That is a good point. And because the Tiananmen Square incident really was a power play made by the US against China, I think it is fair to say that especially that video Daniel Dumbrell did recently about the new method of using these. They're basically inbred racists on YouTube who hate Chinese people just because they're Chinese, because they're not white. And now they've been doing this, they've been masking it by attacking, the Chinese government. And now they're getting establishment support one way or the other. And Daniel Dumbrell said something about how extremism is bred by poverty and a lack of economic conditions. And I think you could describe American society in exactly those terms. The U.S. has a very large pool of people who are facing poverty and desperation, who cannot pay their bills, who are living out on the streets in some cases. This is the perfect breeding ground for radicalization. So how do we think the U.S. is going to try to radicalize them? Against what enemy? And it's very clear they're doing it against China. And we've seen how for decades and decades, the U.S. has desperately tried to contain China. And now they're aiming everything toward what looks like confrontation with China, how direct or indirect it is. But they're building up their population toward that goal. It's very dangerous. I agree. It's extremely dangerous. The propaganda, the desperation a lot of Americans face, and the way they're encouraging, basically sanctioning this sort of racism against Asians in general and against Chinese people in particular, and painting China as, they're behind every woe of America, COVID, the economy, everything is China's fault. It is extremely dangerous. I totally agree with that.
Well, I just want you mentioned those YouTubers that actually bashing China all the time, and also Western media. They're saying, well, we are not against Chinese people, we are against the CPC, and they don't realize this is like so much ignorance. CPC, there's not a system that is so much representative of the people. When you look at the Congress, they are all multimillionaires. They are all the elites. When you go to the CPC, you will have like people from all walks of life. Extremely, there's no more representative of the people. You have minorities. You have, proportions of women. But when I talk about women, it's not like in the Congress. The women in Congress are wives of rich men, or they are themselves millionaire already. Nancy Pelosi, she's 140 million people. How is she representing you? The difference in China is that, and there's a huge difference. It's a market economy, same as we have in the West, very similar. But again, money doesn't corrupt. If you are rich, you are not into politics. The last thing that a rich person wants to do is to get himself into politics by wanting to control the system. Jack Ma might have tried, but it's not going to work. So ultimately, that you have a system that is going to represent you. There's a huge difference. And again, I changed my view on China because I've, from 25 years ago when I arrived in China, and now, it took me time. It's so complex. And even now, I'm staying humble of saying, well, you know what, they're happy with their system and it's delivering. I might not like it for my country, but it's good for them. And it's not, again, if China was attacking the West, or if China had the aspiration of creating its own empire, I would be scared, but it's not. It's not hegemonic. It's focusing on its people, and it's extremely smart, and it's delivering. And that's the problem. When the West is looking at China delivering, how are you going to make your own system legitimate? When you have life expectancy that is going down, in the US, it's going slightly down, and those are basic human rights. How can you actually point the finger at China when you have living standards that are every single indicators is going up in China? That's embarrassing. And again, we need to be factual. Factual. Whatever thing you take, if you want to point the finger at China, well, be factual. And when you come up with facts, it's very hard. It's very hard to criticize China. Because 700 million people lifted out of extreme poverty in 40 years. And that's a fact. That is a fact. How can you fight that? You can't fight that, you know. And those people, they know that. Why do you think there's 95% of people in China that are backing the CPC? Because they have a much better life, and they know, they are so positive about the future. While in the West, we are extremely negative about the future. It's been going down. Remember, you know, 40 years ago in the US, you had the husband working, and actually the mother could take care of the kids, and they could have 3 kids and they could have a house. Now you have kids coming out of university, they have student debt, and they might never pay back the student debt, and it's like never actually buy a house. And that's a reality. Fact. Just fact.
Yeah, it's this competition between the U.S., this hegemony that they imagined they would achieve. You could see them racing against the clock at the turn of the century to the 21st century. They were racing to try to finish off all these unfinished projects. There's so much they wanted to get accomplished that they couldn't. Things like the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident, that was a failure for the West. They thought that there were some gains, there were some objectives that they met by triggering that violence and being able to spin it and lie about it for so long. But I think in the long term, it was a loss for them. But we have to be careful, because the same way they lied about Tiananmen Square in 1989, the way they have lied about that for years and years now, and how they've convinced people that that is true, despite even they themselves admitting that it's not true, they're doing the exact same thing right now toward China about the virus origin. They're doing it about Xinjiang. They're doing it about the South China Sea. So this is why we need to keep doing this. We have to expose the old lies, and we have to continue fighting against the new lies. We kind of went over a little bit, over an hour. There's so much to talk about. I mean, we could talk about this. We could do a whole episode on, the U.S. and China vis-a-vis right now. But I think we'll leave it there. If you have any last things?
Was glad. It was another great episode, Brian.
Yes, and as always, thank you so much for your expertise. All of those links that you were able to dig up when we were talking about this topic, very enlightening. So people watching this, please check the video description for all of the references. I'm going to put all the references in there. I'm also going to put links to where you can follow Angelo on social media, and where you can find my work as well. To everyone who keeps tuning in and supporting the channel and supporting our work, thank you so much. And we will see you again next week. Bye for now.